Could frozen food and tin treats really be better for us than fresh fruits and veg?
And could a ready meal sometimes be healthier than a home-cooked one? Just some of the controversial stories we'll be getting to the bottom of in the programme. Every day we're bombarded with conflicting information about our favourite foods.
1 minute we're told something's good for us, the next it's not, and we're left feeling guilty about what we're eating.
Well, we've been wading through the confusion to separate the scare stories from the truth, so you can choose your food with confidence. Hello, and thank you so much for joining us for Food, Truth or Scare. Now, this is the series that makes sense of all the confusing messages we're fed about the food we eat. And today we'll be looking at some claims that seem to fly in the face of things that I, for one, have always taken for granted.
And it's not just the food itself we'll be investigating. We'll be looking at how the way it's prepared and cooked could have huge implications for your health. From claims that overcooked food causes cancer to finding the best aisle in the supermarket to meet all your nutritional needs. We'll be investigating some pretty startling claims about the food we're all eating.
Coming up, we've all been told to eat more fruit and vegetables, but could tinned or frozen actually be better for us?
Really, really interesting. We also found that the fresh variety of raspberries contain the lowest amount of vitamin C.
Wow. And the overcooked grub, leaving more than a nasty taste. We get to the bottom of claims that burnt potatoes and burnt toast could be seriously bad for your health.
I just remember there being a dramatic headline on the front of one of the papers, burnt toast gives you cancer.
You don't know who to believe and, you know, who not to.
Well, we promised you that during this series we would be looking at some of the most surprising claims that we've come across. And I must admit, this next story genuinely shocked me because I've always believed that fresh produce beats frozen and tinned foods at any time when it comes to nutrition. But if some reports are to be believed, I might have been getting it wrong all these years.
No, absolutely. Well, I've spent most of my working life with fresh produce, so I've been surprised by recent reports online and in the papers saying the opposite of everything I believed was true, and that tinned and frozen veg are actually better for us.
I must admit, I knew that frozen veg like peas can sometimes be as good or even better, but I always assumed that tinned food would be full of nasty little surprises.
I've always been a big advocate of getting people to eat more fruit and veg, so the chance to find out if fresh really is the best was too good to turn down.
Whether it's luscious strawberries, plump peaches or ripe tomatoes, there are few more rewarding shopping experiences than sampling the delights of fresh fruit and veg.
As a former greengrocer, whenever I come into a shop, the first port of call for me is the fresh produce aisle. But according to lots of recent reports, I might be better in the tin or even the freezer section.
Headlines like these suggest not only can going canned or frozen save you money, it may also be just as healthy. And that's a far cry from what I was always told, especially when you read other reports like these that still insist when it comes to our food, fresh is always best. Well, that's left many of us pretty confused, including working mum Jayshree Menay. She'd like to give her 2 kids more fresh food, but sometimes turns to canned or frozen as an affordable and quick way of keeping the family fed.
Tell me about your lifestyle.
I've got 2 children and I'm very busy in terms of the work that I'm doing as well, ranging from businesses to volunteering. So I don't have as much time as I would like to cook fresh.
So do you need to find some shortcuts to get a dinner on the table?
Yep, sometimes I need to use some of the frozen food, some of the tinned food.
Nearly 1,500 products in the UK come in cans. No surprise what the nation's favourite is, baked beans of course, closely followed by tuna and tomatoes. Jayshree has got a somewhat more eclectic collection.
What tins have we got?
We've got some mango pulp, which every Indian home will usually have. We've got black-eyed beans, so
That's a band, isn't it?
Black-eyed peas.
Oh, sorry. Right, my bad.
Black-eyed beans. So if you're in a rush and you want to make something quickly,
yeah.
This is what we, you know, you
Perfect,
would
yeah.
go for a tinned option.
Let's have a quick peep in the freezer.
Here we've got all of the frozen fruit that I use for smoothies. I've got peach and nectarine slices, mango, pineapple and papaya frozen pack as well. So we've also got peas here.
Nice.
Sweet corn, me and my husband, we have a bit of a thing. I prefer frozen, and my husband, he prefers the tinned sweet corn.
So a solid marriage until it comes to sweet corn.
Absolutely.
And then it gets a bit rocky, does it?
Well, Jayshree, we might just be able to settle this argument once and for all. At the University of Chester, Dr. Sohail Mushtaq has been looking into how freezing and canning affects nutrient levels.
There's a common misconception that frozen food is not as good for you as fresh food, because people seem to think that frozen food, by freezing it, it destroys some of the nutrients within it. So we wanted to look at the difference between the content of these micronutrients in frozen versus fresh.
And one of the most shocking findings for me so far is just how old some fresh foods can be. Fish labelled as fresh might have been caught weeks earlier, and depending on the season, apples and potatoes could have been in cold storage for a year before they reach our shelves. Something Dr. Mushtaq says can mean they're not quite as good for you.
By the time it gets on the supermarket shelves, it's been in the supermarket warehouses for a while, it's been on the shelves, and then when you buy it and take it home, it may still be in your cupboards for a while. The micronutrient content will have diminished somewhat.
So Dr. Mushtaq is testing 5 popular fruits and vegetables in their fresh, tinned and frozen forms. He's calculating the vitamin C levels in raspberries, pineapple, sweet corn, carrots and peas. We'll find out later how they all score. I'm meeting up with Jayshree again, this time in the supermarket. She's here with her friend Louise, who must have an empty freezer and kitchen cupboards because she only buys fresh food as she thinks it's healthier. Jayshree, on the other hand, shops mainly for frozen and tinned produce. Nutritionist Charlotte Sterling-Reed is here too to tell us whose basket of goods is healthiest. Straight away, she's encouraging Louise to try some frozen veg.
If you're freezing cauliflower, it's going to be frozen almost as soon as it's picked.
Yeah.
So actually it's going to retain the majority of the nutrients.
Yeah.
Would you ever consider buying frozen cauliflower?
I don't think I ever have.
When it comes to nutrition, it's not going to be a huge amount of differences between the fresh and the frozen. Of course, it depends how fresh this fresh cauliflower is, so how long it's been on the shelf, how long it was in transit, where it's come from. So many different variables when it comes to nutrition of vegetables. But if you were to choose frozen, I think you'd be getting a pretty good deal when it comes to nutrition as well.
So it's thumbs up for frozen cauliflower. But what about the frozen peas in Jayshree's shopping basket?
Look at that. That is I guarantee you could go in 99.9% of people's houses in the UK, they'd have a packet of these.
I agree.
Which is great, because peas, whether they're frozen or fresh, really good source of folate. They're a great source of vitamin C, they contain some iron, so they're actually a really nutrient-dense food. And having them frozen is just such a convenient way to include them in your diet.
And for me, if you can't eat a fresh pea picked within, I think, hours, maximum 1 day, there's no point. Just get frozen.
And now for a cupboard staple, tinned tomatoes, which Charlotte says can be higher in some nutrients than the fresh variety.
What do you think, fan?
Yeah, massive fan. Again, when we're tinning something like tomatoes, they're actually heated, and sometimes that can release some of the nutrients. So, for example, lycopene in tinned tomatoes is higher than it is in the fresh ones.
It's starting to seem that all this talk of tinned and frozen being fresh food's poor relation just doesn't stack up.
Why you can't beat buying fresh produce in a proper food market.
Okay.
Absolutely, 100%. I agree with that.
Agree with that one. I do think it's a lot about the experience of fresh food, but actually, you know, you can get a lot of nutrients when you're buying frozen or tinned products as well. So it's not necessarily that it is the ultimate. It is obviously lovely, and it's great to have a variety in your diet, fresh, frozen, and tinned. So I'd say that yes, this is true to some extent. It's more about the experience, but when it comes to nutrients, you know, they vary massively. So I wouldn't say that fresh is completely king or completely key in this situation.
In fact, as Charlotte has already explained, in some cases buying tinned or frozen versions can actually be more nutritious. Right, another one. Love this for a headline. Canned goods beat fresh food.
In the study that they were talking about here, there were some specific canned products that did have higher levels of vitamins and minerals, but that varies from study to study. So research is a little bit mixed. Ultimately, it's about just choosing fruits and vegetables per se, whether that's fresh, frozen or tinned.
And while that is definitely the main message, there are clever ways to cut waste and maximise the health benefits of what you're eating by in some cases choosing tinned instead of fresh. To demonstrate, Charlotte has taken me to one part of the tins aisle that she says is definitely worth a visit. How good is canned fish versus fresh?
Actually, you can find that some of the tinned fish is higher. For example, some fish, such as mackerel and sardines, they're tinned with their bones. So actually, they can be higher in things like calcium than the fresh fish, which are often deboned when they're sold.
I mean, in terms of cost, it's a fraction of the cost of fresh.
But ultimately, you're going to be getting loads of nutrients if you're consuming tinned fish, frozen fish, fresh fish. So if you're wanting to include that in your diet and you find tinned a convenient way of doing it, I would definitely be saying go for it.
Remember, if it's oily fish you're after, tuna, whether canned or fresh, doesn't count. Back to fruit and veg and the results of the tests that the researchers at the University of Chester carried out. They were looking specifically at the vitamin C content of carrots, peas, corn, raspberries and pineapple in their fresh, frozen and tinned form. Would you like to find out what they revealed?
Yes, I would. So, there was actually some really interesting results. Firstly, we found out that raspberries, peas in their frozen variety were the highest in vitamin C. Really, really interesting. We also found that the fresh variety of raspberries contained the lowest amount of vitamin C. So the tinned and the frozen were both higher in vitamin C than the fresh raspberries. Now, to me, this might just mean that the raspberries have perhaps been on the shelf or they've been in transit for a longer time. But it's also not to say that they were, you know, they had low amounts. When it came to the pineapple, there was a really fairly small amount of difference between the frozen and the fresh, so there was not very much.
Most importantly for Jay Shree, while the fresh sweet corn had the most vitamin C, the tinned variety, which is her husband's favourite, had more than the frozen, which means her husband is getting a little bit more nutritional value from his tinned corn than she is from her frozen. And with the carrots, researchers found that the fresh and the frozen had exactly the same amounts of vitamin C and both more than the tinned.
And have you learnt a lot? That's the big question.
Yes, you've confirmed some things that I was aware of, some things that I wasn't aware of.
None of this means that you should stop eating fresh foods, but it does show that when it comes to making a healthy choice, no one should feel guilty about opting for the cheaper frozen or tinned varieties.
For me, as a nutritionist, it's about how we can get fruit and vegetables into people's diet. And if that is frozen because it's cheaper, because it's more convenient, because it reduces the amount that you're going to throw away at the end of the day, then that's a really winning situation for me, and I'd be saying go for it.
I couldn't agree. As always, Charlotte, I couldn't agree with you more.
Lovely.
Now, it might not, of course, be barbecue weather today, but many people love planning it all and then cooking on the day. For me, nothing beats a properly done barbecued burger. But I'm sure we've all been to somebody's house where you don't quite get it right, with the meat burnt on the outside and completely raw in the middle. And, you know, when that happens, while you might think it's the raw meat that's the problem, if you've caught some of the latest headlines, you'll know that some say it's the burnt bits that are the real danger. So I've been looking into the truth about burnt food, and you might be surprised at what exactly I've found out. Headlines don't come much more scary than when they claim a food that we eat every day could give us cancer. So when stories like these emerged, that overcooked potatoes and burnt toast could do just that, it sent some of us into a panic. But then other reports came out quickly afterwards to say not to worry after all. Are you confused? Well, I'm not surprised.
I just remember there being a dramatic headline on the front of one of the papers, burnt toast gives you cancer. You do think about that increased risk, but then you think, well, if it's just a one-off every now and again, maybe it wouldn't have that same impact.
A little bit of what you like isn't going to kill you, really, is it?
I do see the negative, the negative headlines, but you also see the positive ones, and it's just basically you don't know who to believe and, who not to.
Well, definitely them. It's good barbecue, isn't it? It's not barbecue if it's not burnt.
And when many of us see headlines highlighting the risk of burnt food, our thoughts immediately turn to those blackened foods that were often dished up on our summer barbecue. But the good news is that these stories aren't talking about the charring that occurs when barbecuing most meats and vegetables, like onions and peppers, because they are generally low in starch. When we look behind the headlines, we find that the source of the latest stories linking burnt food with cancer is actually a compound called acrylamide. This is a naturally occurring chemical which forms when you cook any starchy food, like potatoes or bread, above 120 degrees, whether that's baking, frying or grilling. And acrylamide levels increase when these foods get burnt. To learn more about this, I've invited Mark Willis from the Food Standards Agency over to my house, but I don't think he'd want to stay for dinner. Mark, you may be in my kitchen, but I want to point out I did not burn all this food, OK? I want to make that clear to the beginning. You're personally not too worried about the meat aspect.
From an acrylamide point of view, no. That's all about the starchy food.
Of course, everybody burns stuff at times. Who would eat that? I mean, seriously, who would eat that as a roast potato? But these are golden brown. Would these be acceptable?
That's where you want to head for. You want to head so they're still crunchy and they're the things you want and they taste nice, but go for gold. That's the way to go.
In fact, the Food Standards Agency launched a campaign in 2017 called Go for Gold, encouraging people to aim for a golden colour when cooking and thus avoid high acrylamide levels. So now we move on to this great selection of bread. OK, very burnt, down to your golden.
Basically, you cook them as life colour acceptable to you, and obviously bits that have got a bit more brown will have higher levels of acrylamide.
So, for example, comparing this one, which is light brown, to this one, which is slightly burned.
Well, they'll both have acrylamide in, but the darker one will have a slightly higher level.
To find out just how much acrylamide is in this selection of food, including, by the way, my very own roast potatoes, we're sending it all off to be tested, and I'll be getting the results later in the film. So just how dangerous is acrylamide itself? Well, it's known to cause cancer in animals, and the World Health Organization says that acrylamide is probably carcinogenic to humans, and this means that while no definite proof has been found, as a precaution, we should limit our intake of it. But there are mixed messages about this in the press, so I'm asking Mark to clear things up. I want to look at the headlines. So first of all, I show you overcooked potatoes and burnt toast could cause cancer, new research actually suggests. However, when I turn from the Independent to the Daily Mail, don't fear, potatoes or burnt toast, Food Standards Agency, yours, backtracks over cancer link to spuds. So have you changed your mind?
Not at all. Research since 2000 has found that it could cause cancer in animals and potentially causes cancer in humans. We can't prove it in humans yet, but we have to assume that it could cause cancer in humans and it could be part of the risk factors, and therefore we should reduce it as much as possible.
In order to do just that, the Food Standards Agency announced measures that would force restaurants to comply with EU law to limit the build-up of acrylamide in their foods. At this pizzeria in West London, owner Pasquale was left worried that he'd be prevented from cooking his Neapolitan pizza the traditional way. Its trademark signature is a light charring around the crust.
Napolitan pizza is cooked in a wood fire oven. Cooking in a wood fire oven has a direct contact with fire. It's a very old method, takes the high temperature of the burning woods, and it gives that bready color with some beautiful leopard spots.
In the end, these leopard spots were allowed to stay. The FSA exempted foods that had been traditionally cooked with some charring, including pizza and naan bread. And while this was good news for Pasquale, he insists there's absolutely nothing wrong with a little light charring, which should not be mistaken for burning.
We never heard of this kind of thing affecting your health in a bad way. So for us it's a tradition and heritage. We've been doing this for thousands of years.
The new rules also told restaurants how to store starchy foods. Official advice says that none of us should keep raw potatoes in the fridge because this can sweeten them, raising overall acrylamide levels. Now, ideally, they should be kept in a cool, dark place and above 6 degrees. So what about the acrylamide levels in the food we sent off to be tested earlier? Jonathan Griffin, the lead scientist at Kent Scientific Services, has got the results. John, thanks for doing the analysis
Pleasure.
here. We're going to start with the toast.
Yes.
And we'll start with the lightly toasted one.
Yes.
So what's the result?
Well, I think this is typical of what you would expect for your morning toast. And the levels were around about what we call 72 micrograms per kilo. So not high in terms of acrylamide concentration.
So what does that mean? That you wouldn't be worried about that? This
I wouldn't be
accurate?
too worried. I wouldn't be too worried at a level of 72. No.
Okay, so we move on to the medium one.
Yep. That's gone up from 72 to 93. So just by leaving it in your toaster for a bit longer, and you get about 25% increase in your acrylamide content.
And as an individual, would you be anxious about that?
Again, at 93, not too anxious. You know,
Okay.
I would say these are quite low acceptable levels, yes. So
Until
not
I
too
would think
worried.
we get to this burnt one.
Yes, I mean, it's whether or not you would eat that type of burnt toast, but some people would. We're looking at levels of 112, so that's a 50% increase from your lightly browned to your burnt.
Surprisingly, the sausages came out higher at 132 micrograms per kilo. While unprocessed meats don't contain high levels of acrylamide when burnt, processed meats, such as these cheaper cut sausages, often do. And that's because they can contain cereal-based fillers that, when burnt, can form acrylamide. Something to consider, by the way, when deciding what to throw on your barbecue. Next is the roast potatoes, and I'm very pleased to say that my golden beauties have low levels of acrylamide that don't worry John at all. But it's a different matter when it comes to the burnt ones.
The danger is, obviously, when you get to this level of cooking, the levels of acrylamide are going to accelerate significantly.
So how did it accelerate?
We're talking about levels of 200 in the good roast potatoes to 2,000, over 2,500.
I find that astonishing.
Now, at levels of 2,000, these are getting concerning. There are no foods, essentially, that would have benchmark levels at that limit. So that is a concern.
There are different opinions about just how harmful, this actually is.
Yeah.
How do you stand on that?
There has been a link between acrylamide and cancers, which is why they've brought in things like benchmark levels to encourage food companies to reduce time and temperature cooking.
Well, these results seem pretty conclusive, and I'm glad that my mum ingrained in me the attitude to steer clear of burnt food. But what levels are actually dangerous for our health? Sir David Spiegelhalter, Professor for the Public Understanding of Risk at Cambridge University, isn't at all convinced by the risk associated with acrylamide, nor with the Food Standards Agency's drive to limit our exposure to burnt foods.
Acrylamide at very high doses can give cancer to some mice. But there's no evidence that the amount of acrylamide that we can eat in our food can give us cancer. So I think these headlines are deeply misleading. I don't believe acrylamide is really causing measurable harm to people. I think the crucial thing is to distinguish what sounds frightening from what is actually dangerous. Your roast potatoes giving you cancer sounds frightening, but actually it doesn't really matter. What is dangerous are the other aspects of our behaviour. You know, the drinking too much, the smoking, the not exercising.
And according to the professor, it would take a diet consisting of an awful lot of burnt toast to reach any levels that would be concerning.
Someone who consumes a lot of acrylamide per day might be having one slice of really quite burnt toast. And I've worked out that in order to get to a dose that might be dangerous for mice, they would have to have 160 slices of burnt toast like this. Now, that's quite a big margin of safety, but a committee has decided that they would really like us to only have 10,000th of this dangerous dose. And that's about that much burnt toast per day.
Amazing. So the evidence shows that while acrylamide definitely can cause cancer in mice, we don't know for sure that it can cause cancer in humans. And the amounts we would have to consume to get to dangerous levels is incredibly high. So to get clarity on what a doctor would advise their patients to do, I'm asking Dr. Sarah Jarvis. So where do you stand on this whole aspect of acrylamide and burnt food and what it might lead to?
The problem with this, as with so many other stories, is that there's a kernel of truth in it. So if you have very large amounts of acrylamide, it seems very likely that it could increase your risk of cancer. The problem with all these conflicting messages, though, is that people get so confused. And I think if they get confused enough, they just decide they're going to ignore everything. They're not going to trust a word that we doctors or those scientists say.
See, my silly logic would say, well, if there's a kernel of truth in it, why bother? Why burn your toast or why burn your potatoes?
Because most people can only do so many things at a time, or indeed so many things full stop, that are good for them. So to put it into perspective, for instance, we know smoking causes cancer. 4 in 5 people who smoke will die earlier than they would have done otherwise. We know that being obese increases your risk of some cancers by 50%. So here we've got something which might, if you eat a huge amount of it, increase your risk of cancer. And I worry that patients are going to say, right, that's it, I'll give up burnt toast, but I can carry on with the fags.
Now, that would definitely not be a good idea. So unless you're eating burnt toast all day, the experts say you don't need to worry about acrylamide. I will, however, be continuing to follow in my mum's trusty advice and go for gold with my lovely roast potatoes every single time I cook them. Still to come, do you think home-cooked dinners are healthier than microwave-ready meals? Well, you might want to think again.
The home-cooked one is actually double the calories and double the fat and double the salt.
I love this programme because all this week we're looking at some of the latest trends in food and drink, especially those said to have major health benefits, and we'll be putting those claims to the test. So, where are we today, Chris?
Well, I've actually ordered you one.
One what?
One of these.
Cheers.
Moon milk.
It looks pretty revolting, if I'm being honest, and I've never heard of moon milk.
No, I hadn't either, actually.
So I take it doesn't come from outer space?
No, it originates much closer to home. Apparently, it derives from ancient Indian healing systems.
So you take just like ordinary milk like this?
Yep.
And add all spices and honey and things that you want to?
Yeah, and apparently it's supposed to help you with a good night's sleep.
That's brilliant, because I don't sleep very well. So if I have this now, I could be snoring on your shoulder by the end of the programme.
Well, maybe we should leave it till later then, Chloe.
Oh, I don't know. Move over flat white. There's a very photogenic drink clocking up followers worldwide.
There's a new wellness trend hitting social media. It's called moon milk.
Moon milk is a wellness trend that's making a big comeback.
Calmer than a cappuccino and much fancier than a peppermint tea, Moon Milk is the wellness drink that's got internet foodies under its spell. But just how far has word spread?
The milk from the moon.
Oh, moon milk.
Soup, possibly?
Not a clue.
Cheese related? I don't know. Maybe a milk with a spark, sort of a sprinkle of dusting of some sort?
Nearly there. Its basic ingredients are warm cow's milk, honey, and added spices like turmeric, cinnamon and cardamom. And one of the reasons behind its fame is that people can create their own versions of this lunar liquid. So the colourful combinations that they create makes it ideal for gushing over online.
I thought I'd share another moon milk recipe that's a bit different than the other ones because it calls for fresh turmeric.
It is a potent anti-inflammatory drink that I love having before bedtime.
So what are the first impressions on the streets of Manchester?
Tastes quite creamy, milky, with a hint of cinnamon.
Cinnamon, is it?
Oh, it's got quite a kick to it.
Spicy.
A good winter drink.
Question is, should we be cozying up with a mug of moon milk, or is this all just pie in the sky? Dietitian Marcella Fiuza has some promising news.
The main claim around moon milk is that it can help you to go to sleep at night. So is that true? Well, yes and no, really. It makes some kind of scientific sense because cow's milk is a source of tryptophan, which is a sleep-inducing amino acid.
But there's unlikely to be enough tryptophan in a glass to put you asleep.
It contains tryptophan in quite small quantities, so when it's on, it's probably not really enough to send you to sleep at night. It's more likely that actually having a hot beverage and a relaxing ritual before going to bed, that will help you to go to sleep, rather than the actual composition of moon milk sending you off.
Now, while it might aid sleep by making you relaxed, unfortunately the other alleged health advantages of moon milk just aren't true.
There are lots of claims surrounding moon milk that go beyond just helping you to go to sleep. So things like improving fertility and helping with hormone imbalances and helping your immune system. But is there any truth in that? Well, actually, there's no evidence to back up any of those benefits from moon milk.
So sorry, social media influencers, but this is one modern fad that actually started many, many moons ago. A drink of warm milk at bedtime.
There's nothing wrong with having a glass of warm milk before going to bed. If having a hot drink is something that works for you, that's absolutely fine.
As we all live busier and busier lives, more of us are turning away from home cooking and filling our shopping baskets with these pre-cooked ready meals. But for a long time, ready meals have been seen as either a bit of a guilty pleasure or an unhealthy alternative to a meal that we've cooked ourselves. Now, though, that could all be about to change, with recent reports saying they may not be so bad for us after all. Danny Crates has been finding out more.
Since their invention 50 years ago, us Brits have fallen in love with the ready meal. We eat more of them than any other European country, spending nearly £4 billion a year on convenience foods. And I have to say, on occasions, I'm one of them.
But while some people see this as an unhealthy option to the home-cooked meal, recent reports suggest this could actually be the healthier option.
Stories like this suggest that some ready meals could actually be better for you than the home-cooked version. If true, that'd be music to the ears of many of the parents at this after-school playgroup in Manchester. Some say they feel guilty about giving their kids ready meals, especially given the bad reputation such foods have traditionally had.
I try not to as much as possible, but we do use them now and again when needs must. When time is short and there's something in the freezer.
Me and the family eat them, mainly because when you finish work and you get home, it's quick and convenient.
They are quick, they are easy, but I just don't necessarily think they're the best nutritional food for you.
So when it comes to what people think is the healthiest, homemade usually wins over ready meals every time. We asked the parents to pick which of these lasagnas they believe to be the healthier option.
This one looks much nicer because it's got a bit of greenery on it, and that one, the sauce just looks as if it's been congealed for days. So I would go for the wholesome one, which I think is the home-cooked one.
I would say this one looks more appealing. And I'm guessing that's home-cooked.
Certainly, definitely be looking at going for the home-cooked one. Definitely looks a better option, more appealing. No, definitely the home-cooked one.
It's amazing what a bit of parsley can do. To come clean, both dishes are actually the same ready meal. But by serving one in an oven dish with a bit of a garnish, nearly everyone believed it was better for them as it looked homemade.
I'm surprised. I guess I've jumped to conclusions because I've seen the plastic packaging, which I just associate with ready-made meals.
I'm shocked by that, and because the first one in the white dish looks more presentable compared to the second one that looks like it's been thrown in the box.
It would surprise me. On the first visual, it does look like it does look more wholesome, and it does look more favourable to me with the garnish.
But if this recent batch of stories are to be believed, ready meals may not be as bad for our health as we think they are, and could even be better for us than some of the homemade versions.
Bliss, what do you want for your tea? You've got chilli and rice, curry and rice.
Curry and rice, please.
OK.
If they can be healthier, then many parents like widower Pete Smith from Manchester are bound to feel a lot less guilty about serving them up to their kids. Working full-time and looking after 2 children, including 9-year-old Felicity, he often uses ready meals as a quick and convenient option at mealtimes.
I pick the children up straight from finishing work, By the time you're home, it's 4 o'clock. Kids are getting hungry straight away. They don't want to wait till 6, half 6 before they eat. So they are a good thing in that respect. It's much easier than cooking things from scratch. Blaze, come and get your tea.
Coming.
Pete and his children consume ready meals on at least 3 days a week. He does worry about what they're eating, but the pressure to get a hot meal on the table quickly means they are his constant fallback.
I have thought about the health implications and what goes in them. I very rarely look at the ingredients or the nutritional information. They're just straight out of the fridge, straight into the microwave. Is that nice?
So, should Pete be concerned about what he's feeding his children? While some reports claim ready meals can be healthy, it doesn't take long to find other stories which say they can cause serious health problems. One says there are children's ready meals labelled as healthy, but actually are higher in sugar than a donut, and others claiming they contain something called meat glue. Dr. Anna Robbins is a scientist from the University of Salford, and I'm interested to see what she makes of these stories, starting with this one.
Of course, that's quite a headline, though, isn't it? Contains up to 4 teaspoons more of sugar than a donut.
The concern with the sugar, though, is what that sugar does to anybody, but especially a child. The sugar will stress the pancreas to release insulin, and that repeatedly doesn't do the pancreas any good, and eventually the pancreas will give up, and that's what leads to type 2 diabetes, which, as we know through the latest statistics, show that we've now got children under 5 that have got type 2 diabetes, which is a major concern.
Sadly, this headline is true. One of the kids' ready meals looked at in this article was a mild curry that had over twice as many grams of sugar as a McDonald's donut. Now for my least favourite story that says ready meals can contain something called meat glue.
The glue refers to an enzyme such as transglutaminase, which is an enzyme that's naturally occurring in humans and animals, and its role is to bind proteins together. So that will be used to add texture and appearance. Ready meals are not the only meals that you will find these things in. It's quite common in processed food.
This so-called meat glue occurs naturally and is added to some ready meals to bulk them out, and there's no evidence that suggests it's harmful to eat. But now it's time to return to those positive headlines that say some ready meals are actually better for us than the homemade version. Can this really be true? Dietitian Dimple Thacker is helping me. She's asked me to pick my own favourite homemade spaghetti carbonara recipe that I've taken from the cookbook of a well-known celebrity chef. Then she's going to compare the nutritional content of that against 2 different spaghetti carbonara ready meals.
If I was going to cook dinner tonight, surely that's got to be my healthiest option. It's fresh and it's home-cooked.
You might think that, wouldn't you? But when you look at the nutritional composition of each of these 3 carbonaras, the home-cooked one is actually double the calories and double the fat and double the salt compared to the ready meals.
Now that is really surprising. You would assume that if you was going to cook at home a fresh meal, it has to be healthier. Where is that high level of fat and that high level of salt coming from?
It's mainly from the cheese, the oil, the meat and the eggs.
Salt is the real concerning one, because that is one of the things that has been ingrained in us with ready meals, is they have such high salt content, and yet there's more salt in the fresh food than there is in the ready meal.
Yes, there's around about almost 4 grams of salt in this meal compared to 1.5 grams in this meal. And when you think the recommended allowance is 6 grams a day,
that's nearly your daily allowance in one meal.
So a portion of my homemade carbonara has at least twice as much fat, salt and calories as one of the ready meals. And at levels like this, the overall quality of the meal isn't looking as good. In fact, at around 900 calories, this homemade carbonara represents nearly half of a woman's recommended daily intake, and over 35% of a man's. No prizes then for guessing which one Dimple thinks is the healthiest.
This one. And we're eating that one because it's got the greens, so it's half the calories, half the fat of the others, and also when I looked at the ingredients, I recognised every single ingredient. However, I wouldn't eat all of that. I would split it and serve it with some vegetables.
Good advice. So while ready meals can be part of a healthy diet, you need to ensure you're choosing the ones that will be best for you. For Pete, who dishes up microwave meals 3 times a week, that's something he's eager to learn. So Dimple's paying him a visit to show him how he too can include ready meals as part of a healthy diet.
When you're choosing ready meals, I would always say if you can go for the traffic light system first, so that it's always green. And then what I would do is look at the content of the foods. So what we're looking for is making sure that the meal is balanced. So a balanced meal contains carbohydrate, some form of protein, and some vegetables or salad, ideally in equal thirds.
As an example of a healthy meal, Dimple's chosen a mushroom risotto, but she has some tricks up her sleeve to make it even healthier.
It's got the carbohydrate in it, it's got some vegetables in it, but it's lowish on protein. So the way I would balance that, I would add some extra vegetables in, so I'd add some peas in there, and I would add some pine nuts in there to get the extra protein.
Why would you put peas and pine kernels with it?
Because there's not enough to make it a balanced meal. There's not a third's worth on the plate. So I would add the extra, and peas, yeah, exactly.
Adding sufficient vegetables is a good way of getting all the vitamins and fibre you need and can help keep you filled up. And there's good news when it comes to one of the family's favourites, katsu curry.
This dish is completely balanced on its own.
As it is.
It's got the rice, it's got the chicken, so you've got your carbohydrates, you've got your protein in the chicken, and then you've got the lovely vegetables to go with it. Again, is that something that you would go for?
Yeah, we'd eat that, yeah. The children would eat it too, yeah. Without a doubt.
Amazing.
Perfect.
There's nothing like a good curry.
This is just one of the many ready meals out there that don't need anything added to them at all to make them into a balanced meal.
Key rules are around a third, a third, a third. So just make sure a third is filled with veggies or with salad, OK?
Yep.
That way you're covered, and you're making sure that the traffic light system is green.
Exactly.
For Pete, as he preps his next ready meal for the kids, this time following Dimple's advice, the big question is, will he stick to it?
Yeah, I know where to look now to work out whether ready meals are healthy or whether they're not. In the future, we'll continue to use ready meals as long as they're balanced and we can put other things alongside them to make them even more healthy.
So there we have it. Convenience food isn't only quick and easy, it can also be healthy.
And I'm quite sure that'll be music to the ears of many people, including mine. But don't forget, it's always important to read the labels so that you know exactly what is in pre-packaged food, the stuff that you're buying.
And talking of pre-packaged food, it was interesting to see how some tinned and frozen food can actually be healthier than fresh produce.
I'm surprised at that. Well, on that note, I'm afraid that's where we have to leave it for today, but we're going to be back very soon, investigating more of the conflicting claims that leave us all wondering what we should and shouldn't be eating. But until then, thanks for your company today, and from us, bye-bye.
Goodbye.
More from Gloria and Chris tomorrow, straight after breakfast. Get the facts behind the food fads in our podcast, The Best Thing Since Sliced Bread. Download the BBC Sounds app now to hear it. Next, Homes Under the Hammer.